Welcome to the Business Spotlight, brought to you by 123 Internet Group. Hear from industry leaders, businesses and organisations about the topics that matter the most. Business Spotlight, the impact of COVID-19.
Okay, so welcome back to another episode of the Business Spotlight. Scott Jones here from 123 Internet Group. Really pleased today to be with Claire. Claire, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself directly with the multiple hats you wear and tell me a bit about what you do, if that's okay.
Of course. So I'm Claire Eason-Bassett. I know Scott particularly and the 123 Group through being my role as Chief Executive of Milton Keynes Ice Hockey Club, and we're the admin and management behind the MK Lightning. I'm also a senior lecturer at the University of Northampton, but I've only just started that job. Prior to that, I was head of enterprises and events at English National Ballet, based in London. And before that, I ran my own events agency and so on. And invariably, as a woman who wears many hats, I'm also a director of an organisation called 80% Awesome Enterprises, which is based on agile practice applied into everyday life. And I run that with my business partner, Rachel Pickin. I'm also director of the Institute of Event Management, so drawing together and working across the event sector. I'm an under-8s rugby coach for Buckingham Rugby Club.
So fair to say that you've got lots of free time, obviously, Claire.
Always.
No, I mean, obviously, we've known each other for a while now, again, through MK Lightning. We're obviously your platinum partners there for your media and so on. And it's been really, really good for the last season to get to know the new structure behind MKL. Can we start? I mean, again, we're going to go on to the topic of COVID-19 and how this may have affected you and others around you. But should we start just by sort of kicking off about sort of actually, your role and how you've come to be such a pivotal point of working with MKL, the boys, the team and everything else?
Of course. So this time last year, in fact, we're just approaching our anniversary of startup, really. So obviously, MK Lightning's been going for a lot longer. But just over a year ago, we were at the end of what was an awful season. And it was becoming clear that the previous management hadn't been able to make the finances work in such a way that they could meet all of the debts. And the team was kind of in free fall, really. It was the end of the season. The team hadn't done brilliantly, but the relationship between the fans and the players was extraordinarily strong, and that sense of team ownership very much retained. And there's a point where it seemed to be all kind of falling apart, and I kind of got those itchy business fingers. And what I mean by that is there was a point at which I was going, I think I can add value here. I can do something to help, and I'd really like to. And so I had a chat with the previous owners, and they weren't really interested in me working with them. And because I'm fairly determined, one might say, I had a chat with Tim Wallace, who's the then player coach, and he and I then came up with a kind of plan to rescue the club, basically. And so I incorporated Milton Keynes Ice Hockey Club on the 1st of April, and 5 days later I was outed on the Supporters Club Facebook pages saying, who is this and what is this about and what's going to happen and everything else. And actually that was a real indicator of how important the future of the club was to everybody. I said, well, I'm not doing this on my own. Who else wants to play? And from that, after several meetings and everything else, we got to a point where we had a board and a wider team of volunteers looking after different sections of the business and a business plan and investment. And all of a sudden, it started to really roll. And we'd got our ICE contract. In fact, the equivalent of this date last year, we'd got our ICE contract, and we'd got conversations going on with the leagues and all of this kind of stuff all starting to come together. So this time last year was a very intense period. 14th of May, we officially had confirmation that we'd got a National League place, and from that we started running the business, not just starting it up. And so I now am Chief Exec, and that's more by accident than design, but it's also my kind of natural place in that. And what I mean by that is that I'm a natural connector. So my strength is about putting people together and trusting people and delegating and and actually bringing together people who are better than me at every other area. So we are much more than the sum of our parts. We always will be, because that's the nature of a team. And the kind of precept behind all of it was about refocusing our club on the priority about hockey first. And that's hockey first, whether it's with the juniors and with MK Storm, whether it's our sponsor relationships, whether it's our boys on the ice, whether it's our strategic relationships, our PR and marketing, all of those things are all part of hockey first. And that it's about making decisions that are in the best interests of the club. Whilst I am a part owner and chief exec, I'm also a fan, and I have a season ticket. I buy my season tickets, as do all of the board, because we are merely stewards of this club. We are not. It's not about us. It's not about our egos. It's not about what we get from it. It's about looking after our club, and we won't be we're not the first, and we won't be the last. Yeah. There will be other people who come from from now on in, who play really significant roles and leadership roles and take on the club beyond where we are now. So it's a really important thing to recognise that it's not about any one person. So whilst I started it, I was the one person who started putting her head above the parapet and went, right, let's do this better.
I mean, it's been amazing, obviously 12 months. I mean, we've seen such a change from sort of, previously where we are now, not just with the team and the way they are together and the way they gel and everything, but with the leadership team, the board and so on. And I think the fans have seen a massive difference as well. And I can say that being a fan myself. So our relationship obviously is, yes, we're one of the partners, we're one of the sponsors, of course. We also have the joy of employing one of the players as well as one of our full-time creatives. So for those that don't realise that, that's James Griffin, number 15. Sort of a real long-standing part, I think, of the club as well. He's been there for a good few years now. He's very well known, isn't he?
He is indeed.
But I mean, let's talk a little bit about the team. So we're technically, we came to the end of this season, really. We missed the last few games because we couldn't play them.
Yeah.
Talk me through sort of how COVID-19 has directly impacted this sport and what's happened.
Well, it's been really quite extraordinary, and in both good and bad ways, actually, and wasn't so much bad, but challenging, as it has been for everybody. So the season was cut short with the closing down of rinks and of sporting activity in general. So from two sides of it, we had no space to play in, and we weren't allowed to have any people to watch it. So yeah, it was definitely this season has to finish. And at that point in time, as still really, we don't necessarily know what's coming next. Having said that, so we couldn't play, so we lost our last weekend of regulation season games, and we were lining up to go into the playoffs. And I think for me, what's most interesting, aside from the financial impact of not having a further 4 games at home plus the hopefully the Final Four weekend, we had our kind of core products just disappeared overnight. And it was really quite abrupt, and that's not just a financial impact, that's a really emotional impact as well on both all of us that are directly involved, and the fans, and particularly the players, because all our expectations were focused on getting through regulation. The boys had deliberately managed themselves, and under the direction of Cliff and Roscoe, our coaching team, they'd managed themselves to get themselves to a point where we were relatively injury free. We'd got a really strong bench. Everyone was really gelling and working together, and we were playing really well.
It's fair to say. So, I mean, it was a really good season up to that point, wasn't it? I mean, they did exceptionally well. Yeah,
we'd had a really tough start. We'd had some major injuries, including Griff, and we'd come through that. We'd gone through winning streak. We'd got a really solid team of boys, and Cliff had created something in that locker room that's like gold dust. The magic in terms of how those boys interconnect and relate to each other and work together and play together was just brilliant. And so we were going into those playoffs as one of the favourites. And all of a sudden, all of those expectations, all of that passion and commitment and drive and work evaporates.
Yeah.
And we are left with uncertainty and issues and difficult conversations and all of those things that you kind of go, oh, all right, okay, this is more than just pivoting. This is completely changing direction.
And it happened very fast as well, didn't it? You know, like you said, it was this very impactful situation that, you know, you couldn't see coming.
No, I mean, the weekend before it closed, the 14th, 15th, on the 14th, we kind of went, well, we're playing, but we think it's only just, and we think this might be our last game at home.
Yeah.
And which sadly it was, but we, so on that basis, I did a speech at the end of the game to say thank you to everybody, and you know, the kind of thing that I would ordinarily be doing on the very last game of the season, but we'd accelerated it just in case. And as it turned out, that was the case. But I think that the thing with all of the things that are going on with COVID and our collective national response to it and international response, to be fair, is it's not only, of course, it's the right thing to do, but it doesn't negate any of that emotional relationship that we have. And it's why it's really important within our sport, because our fans are hugely committed and passionate about what we do. And they are, of course, our customer base, that we need to keep them really close. And that's difficult when we don't have a core product for them to engage with.
Absolutely.
And it'd be just as difficult if we had completed the season and we'd had a brilliant time and we were now going into the off season as we are, that it would be the same kind of challenge, but without that trauma associated with it, with the end of the season. So it's a much more complex kind of environment than just a black and white, we're on, we're off. It's much more broad ranging than that.
Well, you've got, I mean, some huge sort of events background and experience, obviously, with sort of your career to date. And it's interesting, other people that I've been talking to and other business owners, you know, we're very much trying to keep in touch with our own fan base, with our own clients and our suppliers. And where we may have, you know, a few hundred, we can schedule Zoom calls. We can get on the phone to them and things like this, and the odd email and so on. When you've got such a large fan base, without that core product you can even deliver right now, whether you wanted to or not, that's got to be a massive strain.
It is, and there's an ebb and flow to sports seasons. The same for other sports, not just ice hockey, of course. So, and the desire is always to want to be able to complete it, but because we were so close to the end of the season anyway, there isn't really a rational or viable way that we could, bearing in mind that player contracts run the season duration, not on a permanent all year round basis. So we have to kind of deal with that first, and kind of go, the season is now done. We need to close down that season and move into the next.
Sure.
And building and retaining those relationships is really important. And it's a key part of our social media strategy. More broadly, it's about still telling the story, even though we don't have that core story to tell. So what we're doing is a whole part of stuff that's around heritage and nostalgia, looking back over the club's whole history, looking back over the season, lots of engagement with individual players, ongoing supporters club fundraising activity, restreaming previous games from this last season. So it's really trying to keep that connection. And it's also important that we let people step away for a bit too, because it can be incredibly intense. And certainly for us over the last season, that period over Christmas and January was extraordinary, when we had phenomenal attendance and we were winning a lot, which is always a nice place to be. So we go from that, where it's a very easy story to tell, it's a very easy ticket to sell, into where we are now, where we don't have that core product. So we, whilst we are launching season tickets, have launched them by the time this is released, and we are signing players and all of that kind of stuff. That's all about looking forward. So what we're trying to do is keep our fans coming with us in exactly the same way as lots of other businesses are doing the same with clients and customers more broadly, and supply chain.
Yeah, I think that's important, isn't it? I think we went through a phase of, oh my God, what's going on? Businesses could have had to make some very tough decisions very quickly. Some of them, from the research and findings we heard from the British Chamber of Commerce, for example, there were lots of businesses out there that really relied upon that steady flow of income. And when they lost that, only had very small cash reserves. And this is sort of it could have a massive impact to businesses. Now, when you're a long-standing business, naturally you build up these cash reserves behind yourself, hopefully. And what you do is you kind of have a plan. I don't think anybody could have even thought about turning around this scenario.
Absolutely.
You know, so I think every business had to do what they can to kind of pivot, to change, to transform. A lot of companies obviously embracing technology. So, I mean, you know, with the players at the moment, I presume a lot of them are kind of coming to the end of the contract, ready for renewal as well. We've seen some obviously that have been re-signed. So I know for a fact that James Griffin has been re-signed. So I'm
Indeed
back on the ice the next season, whatever that may look like. But I mean, are you using technology to keep in touch like this with players directly? Is a coach still in touch with the players at the moment?
Very much so. So I mean, it seems that we run our entire business most of the time on WhatsApp groups, and the players have one of those at least, if not several more. And they, part of it is about supporting each other. Absolutely, Cliff and Ross are part of that mix as well. And it is a strange thing to be closing a season that we don't feel really was finished. So again, every single one of those players is desperate to get on the ice.
Yeah.
And every single one of them looks at the 1920 season and its unfinished business. So I know that James will be coming back on that ice as soon as he possibly can, and will be back with a vengeance, wanting to prove himself once again, and hopefully be contending for silverware with all of the boys. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's a strange kind of changeover period. There's massive change going on, but it is all about using the tools that we have to be able to keep in touch and to retain that engagement across the board, whether that's customers in terms of fans or suppliers in purely business model context of our players.
Yeah, I think really, I mean, you know, using technology to keep in front of people, to keep at that communication is massively important. Equally, this is going to have some impact to mental health as well. You know, there've been lots of reports out there already, not just about sort of adults, but also children as well. You know, I've got 2 young children that, you know, as you know, it's not uncommon to be on a call like this and see them run past the background, you know, to go and answer the door for the postman. You know, these things are now part of the normal, you know, every day. I think some of us are going to miss that post-COVID, I guess, as well. We're going to have to readapt. How have you found it being at home with your family and things like that?
Well, I just have the one boy, but I also have a fairly significantly ill husband and a Labrador. And actually, so life is chaotic, and the same as everyone's life is chaotic. That is the new normal right now. What I find interesting is that there is a much greater acceptance in these particular circumstances, which I really hope we retain, of the whole person. So it's not just about the work brain that comes into work, it's everything else. And actually that's a much more interesting and collaborative and engaging way to work. So, you know, I love the fact that I get an insight into my colleagues' homes. That's brilliant. I love it. And I've actually got to meet their children through Zoom calls and through Teams or whatever we're doing, WebExes, etc. So it's really nice to be able to build relationships. You know, I started the job at the University of Northampton a week and a half ago, and so I've had to leave one job and start another job without actually seeing anybody.
This must be incredible situation again at the moment. You know, having not only starting a new job, you know, for, you know, organisations out there at the moment to carry on that process with HR and so on as well. You know, but also, you know, onboarding in the traditional sense, meeting the people you're going to be working with, your co-workers. You know, you lose that face-to-face, that initial contact. So this must be incredibly different as well at the moment. It
is strange, but at the same time, it's, you know, I'm doing things that I have kind of always said I would. So, for example, and again, this is part of managing my own mental health, really. But this is complicated, but my sister's mother-in-law is a personal trainer based in Cornwall. Okay. And she and I've trained together for quite a long time. And when I moved up here a couple of years ago, we'd stopped training together. And so we now, because of COVID, because I'm actually at home, I'm now doing training sessions with her again through FaceTime, which is brilliant. And it's a really good thing to be doing. Yeah. But I've said I would do that for the last 2 years. And this has finally made me do it. And the same with Face Wine, which actually is, to be fair, I invented yonks ago with my friend Nikki when we lived 300 miles apart. And now we're only about 60 miles apart. But we've been drinking the same bottle of wine and eating the same cheese and chatting on FaceTime. But it's kind of dwindled because we were theoretically closer together. And that's been reinvigorated, not just with my friend Nikki, but more broadly with my wider support network. And whilst it's not the same, and it never will be the same, it's a pretty good substitute. And actually, I'm spending more quality time talking with them than just being physically in the same space, and at the same time then kind of running around after family, etc., etc. So we're getting more quality time because of that. Having said all that, I think this is incredibly difficult to process, and there are lots of articles about what people should, shouldn't, wouldn't do in these circumstances. I get a bit frustrated with those that seem to have or be having perfect lockdown experience. It kind of drives me nuts because mine sure as hell isn't.
It's not a perfect situation, is it? We've not experienced things like this before. So, everyone I think will, naturally respond differently to this as well. We know from our tech, sort of tech background that, people that are generally introverts, are having now to become extroverts by being on Zoom, perhaps by being on video in front of their clients that they perhaps wouldn't have had to do before. And that's a challenge in itself. Again, technology is fantastic. We can use this to sort of connect with people. And going back to what you said before, I am finding that I'm speaking to friends and family and so on that, actually I'm spending more time doing that, which is quite nice. How does your day look at the moment? I mean, are you getting up earlier, later? Are you sleeping?
My sleep's always been a bit of a variable feast. But do you know what? There are days when this echoes with the 80% awesome thing. So the 80% awesome is the idea that working at 100% awesome all the time, however you define your awesome, working at 100% is impossible and unsustainable. So the idea is that working at 80% is optimum. That's exactly where you want to be, because you've got a little bit of slack to be able to cope with when it all goes a bit pear-shaped. The thing is, I've realised that 20% isn't really enough right now. I need a bit more to be able to get. But the whole point of the 80% Awesome project is about recognising that we don't have to be anywhere on that scale, and actually sometimes 10% is the best you're going to get, and it's fine. And it's not. There's no judgment in there. It's about understanding yourself and giving yourself a kind of a very unscientific measure of how you're doing, and not because it's about beating yourself up or being different or saying what you should be doing, but by recognizing actually what you have done, and that sometimes getting dressed and having breakfast is top. That's you've reached your peak for that day, and it's okay to feel a bit there. That's fine. And I think particularly at the moment, because this is an extraordinarily traumatic period in our global history, and it's because it's about change. So grief is the process of reflecting and responding to change. Given the scale and scope of this particular change, it's understandable that we're all grieving a bit, and we need to give ourselves a bit of slack for that. So I try and build that into my day as much as I can, and each day is slightly different. But there are days when I feel like all I want to do is nap, and there are days when I am on fire and I'm super productive, and I get all the housework done and all of my work and all of the hockey work, and I'm by 7 o'clock I'm pouring myself a glass of wine and I'm quite happy. Thank you very much. I think every day is very, very different, and there's no one size fits all. And I think a lot of, for me, certainly the coping mechanism is about listening to myself and what I can and can't do, and actually accepting that it's okay to be at 10%.
I think a lot of this is about being flexible, isn't it? And I think employers moving forward, there's lots of employers that are very flexible in their arrangement with employees, some that have been forced into digital transformation, some that already had it. But that flexibility, I think, is going to remain with a lot of businesses moving forward. We need to understand that, the traditional sense of a 9 to 5, does it have to be 9 to 5? Can we start midday? If we cover our tasks, if we complete our jobs, why can't we finish early? Let's go and get that glass of wine early,
Absolutely. And it's interesting because with the University of Northampton is that I've started, and it's already in that space. So it's very much about teaching into the next academic year will be timetabled between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Partly to give us more resource in terms of room and space, but also to give that broader flexibility around when we work, and that it isn't 9 to 5, and but it becomes much more focused on the quality of task. And so this is about the time needed to do the job, not the time that you're contracted to work. For me, it connects very strongly with the agile methodology, and which is something that I very much subscribe to. And it is about people over process, and it is about collaboration over contract negotiation, and it's about making it work as opposed to having every I dotted and every T crossed. Neither of them is the exclusion of the other, but you get the feel for, this is about being very adaptable and flexible. I mean, honestly, the military motto across all 3 of our core services is adapt and overcome. That's what we're doing, and that's what we've been forced to do, and that's what's quite interesting from a business perspective is that we are this is enforced change, and some people are taking to it like Dr. Water, who are already primed, ready to accept that change, not necessarily prepared for it, but in the right mindset for it, and others have really struggled. And that's not about traditionalist or new tech or anything. It's not about the type of business. It's very much about the mindset that was behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you think that businesses moving, past the COVID sort of period, and we're back to the new normal, whatever that may look like, whenever that might be, that they're going to be stronger businesses? They're certainly going to be, I think, more flexible. They're going to be able to pivot very quickly because they will have learned this now. They've experienced it firsthand, where we wouldn't have perhaps done that before. Do you think business is going to be stronger moving forward?
I think some will be. I think sadly we're going to lose quite a lot, and not necessarily because of mindset or anything else, but because of the sector or types of organisations they are, resources available, etc. And there is an inconsistency of support across different sectors and different types of organisations. So there are issues in terms of the support that is available at the moment to get businesses through. So I think sadly we'll lose a number, but those that do get through it, I think will have had an opportunity to explore a different way of doing things. So optimistically, I'd hope that we see businesses taking advantage of technology more, that we see a greater acceptance of flexibility and flexible working, a greater acceptance of that whole person coming to work. And actually that should, in theory, she says as a new academic, that it should then drive greater productivity and increased value generation, both for the businesses, for the customers, and for individual employees and business owners.
Yeah, I mean, we touched a little bit on sort of mental health earlier on. I mean, I know with my team, they're quite a young team. I know we're all missing the nice work environment that we've been used to for many years. But we've been sort of, jumping on calls with them at the start of the day and the end of the day, just to, touch in, make sure everything's running okay. And we're being very flexible with them as well. It gives us a chance to look at new processes, improve the processes that we currently got in place. But we're also trying to keep our level of culture there as well. One thing we talk about with sports teams, that bond that they have in the locker rooms, for example, that Cliff has built up the last season. It's important not to let that slip. So for ourselves, we've been doing the odd bingo night, a bit of online gaming, things like this. It's crucially important, I think, as well, isn't it? Would you agree?
Absolutely. The social bit is, it's a very human characteristic to want and desire that, and I think that's the thing we can't have right now. And whilst we can rationally explain it, there is something that makes us go, do you know what, I really just want to go to the pub with friends. And colleagues, and I want to have that contact. I'd really like to be able to hug my sister. It's that kind of, and I can't right now. So it's that's a really intuitive kind of base need to have that kind of contact. And yes, we're finding different ways to be sociable online, and team beers and board meetings via Zoom, etc. All of those things are vital. And we quite often will start a board meeting with who's drinking what tonight. What round is it in? And that kind of, and that's very sociable, and it's a very positive way to work, because actually it is much more about that whole person as well. And it is about the care that we have for each other as colleagues, whether that's in the voluntary capacity that I am with MK Lightning, or whether it's in my professional capacity. Is the very genuine, can we do this meeting with Gin next week? That kind of thing. And again, it's building relationships and rapport at a distance, and that's a real challenge. and maintaining them. So yeah,
it's really a sort of almost like a new skill set for many, isn't it, as well? Coming from sort of a sales role effectively, and a sort of ownership role of a business, it's about these customer relationships and actually being in a room with people, seeing their reactions to presentations and so on. That's very different right now. You don't get that sense, you don't have that feel, and actually to shake the hand, when you go into the meeting and things, you don't have these sort of personal connections now. So we have to replace that with other things. And I think it is nice, what I'm experiencing is a lot more camaraderie. We're all in the same situation, actually. We're different points and we're doing different things to respond to it. But we've all got the same issues right now, the same global problem, the pandemic that we're kind of overcome.
I've seen quite a lot of stuff around the we're all in the same boat. It's kind of, actually, no, we're not in the same boat. We're in the same storm. We're all in different boats with different capabilities, and some of us will weather that storm and some of us won't. Or we will find shore and we will adapt our vehicles and find a different way of traversing whatever terrain is ahead of us. So I think you're absolutely right that this is unprecedented and it's difficult, and none of the resources that we used to rely on in terms of our communication and team building and all that kind of stuff, all of the social side of things, we can't rely on anymore. So we've had to find new ways. Innovation is a really good thing to come out of this whole process. But I think it's also important to note that we shouldn't, it's not jettisoning everything for what our current new normal is. This is just the current normal. Yeah. And that there will be another new normal to come, and probably several more after that before we settle into a vague semblance of what was before. I think, having obviously been very deeply within the cultural sector working for English National Ballet, that's a very different set of circumstances, similar though it is to the sports side of things, where as an organisation we had a number of large sets of performances, including Swan Lake at the Royal Albert Hall, cancelled. And that doesn't change. The business model is exactly the same, whether it's ice hockey or ballet, to be honest. It's very high fixed costs and very variable income. And so that presents a much more significant risk to the ongoing viability of an organisation when there's limited flexibility. And so our cultural sector is going to look very different at the end of all of this, as is our sporting world, as is our business environment, our work environment, and everything else. So I think the challenge is actually about coping with the not knowing. Yeah. All we know about is what we have now, and that's it.
Yeah. I think that it's clear. We're all doing our best. Whether that be homeschooling, whether that be getting used to the fact that we're in one location, and not connecting with our friends down the pub and things like that. It's a very different scenario right now. I mean, myself personally, I am massively looking forward to getting back into whatever the new normal looks like, seeing people face to face again, and getting back into sport, obviously. So I can't wait for the new season to start. We're very pleased to be joining you again this season into next, as obviously your sponsor again, and also as a partner. So we're really looking forward to that, the whole team. I know James is very excited about returning to the ice, as well as I'm sure the other guys are. I mean, just to sort of close off with, what's to come? I mean, what are the exciting avenues that you've been looking forward to with the new season?
Well, we're just going into our second year of operations in this format. So we're at a very kind of naturally reflective point, and closing down one season to go into the next. We're just starting with that new shoots of next season, obviously with signing Griff, with you guys coming on board, and with opening season tickets and all of the things that we'd expect to normally be doing at this time in the annual cycle. I think the really big exciting things are that I'm looking forward to. Again, first game back. Getting back into the rink and seeing the boys on the ice. I just seeing the boys, actually. I kind of miss not having that regular weekly kind of hi, how are you? And I miss the banter that they have as a cohort. I think there is something extraordinarily special about that belonging to that team, and I love being part of making that happen. There is a really lovely dynamic about reciprocity between management and players, whereby they can't do their job if we don't do ours.
Sure.
We don't have a job if they don't do theirs. So, albeit voluntary job in my case, and everyone else off ice. So that kind of tension can be really difficult and challenging to manage. But I have to say, with our team and with our broader volunteer team, that really isn't the challenge. The challenge is that I miss them all, and so I can't wait to see everybody. I can't wait to see what characters of our team, like Griff and like Liam Stewart, who we've already announced as well. What kind of antics they're going to be getting up to into next season. The scoring of goals, all of that stuff. That actually being able to have our end of season party, which will move to the beginning of season once we can, once we're allowed to have gatherings again. All of those kinds of things. We're not planning any massive change. I think all the change that's going on right now is more than enough for everybody to cope with. And so the exciting bit is about building on what we started and broadening that out, taking our place in the owners group. So all 10 of the teams meet on a fairly regular basis according to need to discuss whatever's coming up next and all that kind of stuff, along with the English Ice Hockey Association. So looking at how we collectively plan for next season and work together on all of that. And aside from hockey, I'm looking forward to getting into the classroom again and teaching in person, face to face, and working with students on projects and all of that kind of stuff. And I can't wait to see the ballet back on stage.
Fantastic. As I say, there's lots of exciting things to look forward to. I think that we mustn't forget that the current situation will pass and we will adapt. When we will move on. Look, thank you for joining me today. Really good to
pleasure. Thank you.
Find out all about your hectic lifestyle and all the different hats you wear. And we look forward to next season with MKL.
Brilliant. We look forward to it too.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you need advice with your digital marketing, please feel free to reach out to 123 Internet Group or visit www.123internet.agency to find out more about our services.